Welcome to Peoples and Things, where we explore human life with technology. I'm Lee Vinsel. Brothers and sisters of the P&T. Something I have been thinking and slowly writing about in the past few years is the idea that a lot of work in STS has become idealist as opposed to materialist in nature. By idealist, I mean that the methods and analysis are aimed at uncovering and reconstructing ideas. And by materialism, I mean not only the state of the material world, especially the human-made parts of that world, but also what we can call the social relations around those material things, including inequalities around class, gender, race, ability, and so many other differences. Often this idealism problem arises when scholars get stuck at the level of discourse, the things that people say and think, and don't go on to examine the material world, including by seeing how what people say aligns or doesn't align with reality. Because, of course, this is a part of the ways of talking and thinking that we call ideology. We should expect there to be a gap between what people are saying and the way the world is. And we can't really see that gap unless we do the kinds of work that enable us to do so. One place I've especially seen idealism of this sort rear its head is in work on so-called socio-technical imaginaries, visions and ideas that different individuals and groups put forward about scientific and technological futures. Like, I have seen people give talks where they do deep interpretations of the imaginaries some group put forward, and then the talk ends, and I'm like, hold on, you're going to tell us what happened, whether any of this panned out, and the degree to which any of this actually affected the world, aren't you? But the answer often enough is a big fat no. Often the speaker doesn't tell us about the material reality because they haven't done the kinds of research that will allow them to have anything to say about it. This can happen for lots of reasons, but one of the big ones is, frankly, that interpreting quote-unquote imaginaries, which are often just laying around in publicly available documents, is just a hell of a lot easier than doing deep materialist research, where you're trying to get at material change in the world and how it has affected different groups. Put another way, often we get stuck at the level of the mind because we're kind of lazy. And more troubling, sometimes junior scholars get stuck at the level of the mind because their teachers haven't trained them to do materialist analysis, and that's because the teachers' teachers didn't teach them to do materialist analysis, and that's because the teachers' teachers' teachers, and so on and so forth. In this way, there are traditions of what we can think of as methodological weakness in the field. Now, one time I was talking about this issue on social media, and I stumbled upon the interesting work of today's guest, Lauren Bridges, an assistant professor of media studies at the University of Virginia. And I think Lauren shows us clearly that we can attend to socio-technical imaginaries and do materialist analysis as it should be. Here's how Lauren does this. In a lot of work, she examines the pressures that local governments and communities face to take part in efforts around digitalization, including by building data centers in these places and so on. And these pressures are accompanied by lots of imaginaries of like building the technological future and the jobs that will come with such efforts and so on. There are lots of dreams and promises made around these things. But then Lauren attends to the kinds of tensions and frictions that develop between the actual material realities in these localities and those dreams. In lots of cases, there's a profound mismatch between the promissory notes and the realities on the ground. So in this interview, Lauren and I talk through this side of her work, and we also discuss a bunch of other things she's up to. It's really quite impressive, all this stuff she's been up to in the last couple of years. One thing before I wrap up here In the months since Lauren and I recorded this interview, I have been thinking a lot about the environmental impacts of data centers and the claims that people are making about these impacts, especially on social media. And I think there might be a gap between the ideas and realities here, too. And we might hypothesize that people might be making overly dramatic claims because their words, too, are a function of ideology, namely the ideology sometimes called the techlash, wherein it has become popular to publicly make negative judgments against digital technology firms. For sure, just as Lauren points out, data centers are having big effects on localities and regional energy systems, but this is what you'd expect from any energy-intensive industry. I mean, do you know how much electricity aluminum smelters use? I saw in a chart on Adam Tooze's Chartbook Substack that the forecast for new global electricity demand puts data centers at something like 2.5% of projected new demand, far below the demand projected for all kinds of basic, old, boring industries. And per prompt energy uses for AI tools like ChatGPT are hard to come by, but according to a few estimates I've seen, it would take something like 800 ChatGPT prompts to equal the energy usage of drying a single load of laundry. And so if people are saying on social media that they aren't using ChatGPT for environmental reasons, I hope to God they aren't drying their laundry or doing a bunch of other currently, considered normal activities that have even higher energy loads. Or another angle you hear a lot is that data centers require a great deal of water for cooling, with estimates ranging between 300,000 and 5 million gallons today. That sounds like a lot, and it is in some ways, especially if you go on to say that it equals the consumption of thousands of households or a small town and such. But you have to keep in mind that a lot of industry is very thirsty and uses a ton of water. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency estimates that industry in the United States uses over 18 billion gallons of water per day, with semiconductor fabs using tens of millions of gallons per day, and a nuclear power plant in Illinois using 284.5 billion gallons per year, which translates to something like 680 million gallons per day, which just blows the mind. But oddly, you don't see the people squawking about data centers' water usage talking about all of these other industrial water uses. So it seems to me we've somehow lost a sense of perspective and proportionality on this topic. And again, my hunch is that people have lost perspective because their views are themselves the products of ideology rather than actual thinking. Anyway, I wish I'd had these thoughts earlier and had a chance to talk through them with Lauren, but we had so many other interesting topics to tackle. You'll see. You will see. Which is why I say, hey, get excited! Lauren, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Lee. I'm really excited to be here.
So, Lauren, if you're talking to a stranger, how do you explain to them what your work is about, what you do?
Oh, isn't this a perpetual dilemma for all academics?
Really is.
and something that I practice daily with my family. I guess I explain it as everything that we do on the internet has a material footprint. And I've been looking at where that material footprint is located, what the politics are around that footprint, and how we even have this internet, this thing called the internet that we have today.
Yeah.
And what all its various impacts are.
And so you got a degree out of, what is it? It's the, at the University of Pennsylvania, the Annenberg School, right? Of Communications. And what are you,
Yes.
so were you working on kind of the stuff of the cloud and computing in your dissertation work?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, I've had a few different careers in my life. And before I came to academia, I worked in publishing and I worked briefly in manufacturing. And I think these experiences really shaped my research interests.
Yeah.
So previously, I had witnessed these huge digital transformations happening in these very disparate industries, one being publishing, the other one being manufacturing. And we were seeing like new forms of labor production, labor being outsourced to all different locations around the world. And then in manufacturing, similar things. The introduction of, surveillance technologies in the workplace, sensing technologies, automation, etc. And all of this was made possible by this new form of internet-connected computing that was located somewhere else. And so I think through various experiences in my career previously, I started to ask questions about, so like, where is this happening? What is the cloud, first of all, because this is like a very opaque term. And where is it? And what does it mean that lots of businesses, and I was working in Australia and in the United States, what does it mean that these companies in Australia and in the US, and I assumed at that point around the world, are now relying on this centralized form of what I have now started to call industrial computing?
Mm-hmm. That's nice.
Um, so I kind of came into the program with a few of these questions, and then throughout my PhD, I started to address them with specific case studies by looking at, for example, a previous article that I wrote on Amazon Ring. My motivating question was, what is different with internet connected home surveillance cameras that is different from those 1970s closed loop systems? And for me, the cloud is central here because it centralizes all of the feeds from surveillance that are then it's easy to apply analytics to it, facial recognition technology, et cetera.
Yeah.
So the power for me, not to be too techno-determinist, but the affordances of the cloud really do change a lot of things.
Yeah, that's cool. And I appreciate your use of affordances in a couple of different places it comes up. That's a really core concept for me too. So I want to talk to you more about the ring piece a bit later, but what were the other cases you looked at for your doctoral work?
So for my doctoral work, I wanted to really bring the cloud down to earth, to use a
I like
overused
that.
metaphor.
Yeah.
And I went into that project wanting to study the impacts of Amazon on local communities.
Yeah.
Amazon's such a huge company. It's also the largest cloud computing, commercial cloud computing company in the world. And I really wanted to understand, so how does this look at a local level? What are those local tensions look like? What is the local political conditions that allow for the continued expansion of these infrastructures that uphold our digital worlds? And in doing so, I found a slightly more complex story, such as the benefit of doing field work, than I anticipated. What I found really is that Amazon is a single actor amongst a sea of actors in these huge transformational shifts that are happening in these areas.
Yeah.
And Amazon is an incredibly influential actor amongst those. So it makes sense to pay attention to what a company like Amazon, Microsoft, or Google are doing
Mm-hmm.
in these areas. But we can't overlook what is happening beyond those companies because they're part of larger shifts that are happening. And so to do that, I did a multi-sided ethnography in Northern Virginia and in Southern Inland California. So Northern Virginia being the densest concentration of data centers in the US, and Southern Inland California being the densest concentration of warehouses.
Okay.
And I see these two actually as related to one another. The modern warehouse doesn't exist without digitization. It doesn't exist without, intense worker surveillance, automation, and digitization throughout the whole process. And that's made possible by this computing infrastructure that's located elsewhere. So there are connections between these sites for me. I see them as entangled in the same political economy of data and supporting one another. And actually, when you think back to the origins of AWS, it's kind of hard to find these corporate
Yeah,
histories.
yeah, yeah. I'm excited.
Yeah,
You're getting excited over here. I love this.
I'm going off on a tangent here.
No, no, it's good. But please tell us about
Oh,
AWS.
yeah. So, like, according to the folklore of all of the tech blogs that you might read about the origins of AWS, and I don't know how credible all these sources are, but according to these sources, AWS was something that was it was tossed around as an internal solution to this perpetual computing problem that they were having.
Yeah,
So Amazon previously, and still is still just a huge online retail company. And to be effective at doing online retail, you have to have pretty good control over your digital assets, over your what is your current stock levels? A logistics company in many ways today is a data company. Um, as a soundbite for you, and I'm not sure if I'm going to stick with that in the future, but we'll go with it for now. And so for every new project that Amazon like the internal IT guys had to create. They had to build new infrastructure, like program it, had to get new servers,
yeah,
etc. And then they'd have to wind it down, and it wasn't flexible enough. So they had been kind of workshopping ideas, and they came up with this. What if we had this like scalable, flexible model of computing that we could spin up new projects really easy and wind them down really easily. And then they were like, actually, that's a really great idea. And maybe it's got commercial value because we mustn't be the only ones struggling with this problem. And variations of centralized computing's like utility computing existed in the 1960s, or even
sure.
earlier, long before this time. It's just that things had changed with the internet and commercial access to the internet and internet infrastructure in a way that made this kind of old idea new again and made it a commercially viable idea.
Yeah,
And so I think, like, when I think about the origin even of cloud computing, if we want to attribute it to Amazon, and maybe that's a mistake, and it is a mistake because Amazon's not they didn't come up with this idea. It's just that they made it commercially viable in its modern form. But yeah, if we want to attribute the modern form of cloud computing, the commercial one that exists today, to Amazon, then it really came out of the need to better manage their logistics for their warehouse, for their
yeah, yeah,
retail
yeah.
business.
I like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I love about AWS is I don't know, I haven't looked at this in a year or two, but I mean, for a long time, it was by far the most profitable part of Amazon. I mean, like the retail side, Amazon.com, where many of us order stuff, that's going to be low margin. I mean, that's the whole business model is super low margin stuff, right? So you're never going to be like, we have huge revenue streams. I mean, it's sizable because of how huge it is, but it's very low margin per purchase. But apparently AWS did, they were able to get bigger margins on that. So for a long time, it was like, even though I've heard this story too, that it kind of developed as this ancillary internal service that then was turned outward. It ended up becoming like the big cash cow for them, right?
Yeah, and you're right. At various different points, AWS was floating the rest of the Amazon business, but it basically allowed Amazon to enter into new global markets, to continue to build warehouses and infrastructure and more logistical infrastructures to better serve their customers. But actually, the Amazon retail is still incredibly profitable. So I
Oh
think
yeah,
for
sure.
several years
Yeah.
there, AWS was like the most profitable, but now we're seeing new parts of their of their bottom line attributed to like a huge growth in advertising, which is also
Right.
a data
Right, right,
business as
right,
well.
right.
Um, and yeah, but I think for several years, AWS was, making up the majority of their profit
Yeah, yeah.
margins, which then allows them to continue to,
Lose
assert
so
market
much money on
dominance.
Alexa.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and Amazon Ring,
Right.
buy new companies and
Yeah.
acquire other companies, which, might start out as losses, but then they grow into profit cash cows themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll see if it ever happens with Alexa. It's looking grim for Alexa is not producing. So the
Yeah.
first time I think, well, you're one of these people. I have a lot of these people in my life where I kind of knew about you one way and then I knew about you another way, but those two people weren't connected. So I think I knew first learned about you via exhibit that's here at Virginia Tech that we'll talk about in a second. But then I learned the first piece I read by you is related to what we're talking about, and it's called "Competing Digital Capacities Between Digital Governance and Local Data Center Trade-offs." So why don't you? I have a bunch of questions and thoughts for you on that piece, but why don't you just tell us what it's about first?
Okay. So that piece I wanted to focus on what are the local conflicts that happen when energy capacity or energy is being consumed by data centers and then it's not available for other activities in that community. And I see there being a huge disconnect for this push towards digitization as government policies or as policymakers,
Yeah.
or as like a national agenda. And then uh, in realizing those national digitization goals, how it overlooks the local impacts of being able to reach those goals.
Yeah.
Um, so, I'm like thinking,
No, well, and
is there a
part of so
better way? Is there a better way for me to
no,
explain
that's
this?
good. So you're
I
looking at
should have
the
like prepared.
disconnect between our kind of visions, and we're going to get into that in a second, and like
Yeah,
real material local realities, right? And part of it
exactly.
probably, I think you probably argue in the piece, but also would just think in general is that people don't understand what it's one of this classic issue with the cloud, right? The cloud is that people don't really realize all the material and energy and resource demands this industry has. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. I think people and governments and policymakers and those that are in positions of power also don't realize that to even imagine, this digital future or to imagine a government that's reliant on these digital services, that requires an immense amount of computing. It requires an immense amount of infrastructures, cables, that are connected to that computing to be able to make that possible. Because I think, the original fallacy with digital is that it's immaterial.
Right.
And so many incredible scholars have done great work
Yeah.
pushing back against that. But we still see this imaginary of the digital being immaterial and, endless and endlessly accessible and always connected being reproduced in public policy documents and in these national priority setting documents.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to look at in this piece is investigating what this disconnect is between setting a national agenda for digitization and what then the material requirements are to meet that national agenda. And those material requirements, so I'm honed in on data centers, but that's certainly not the only thing. It's just that for me is that's the industrial machine
Yeah.
that makes this possible. It's
Mhm.
one of.
Mhm.
But for me, it's like a central engine that makes this possible. And the the thing with data centers is that they're not located everywhere. They're not just distributed everywhere equally. They're located in development hotspots that are very centralized for a number of historical reasons that we could get into, but we don't need to go down that rabbit hole today. But there are, certain path dependencies that have led to the development of development hotspots for data centers, such as Northern Virginia, which is a one area that I look at closely. But they're also around in California and Arizona and Texas. And then these hotspots happen also around the world. So London is another hotspot. We're seeing lots of development in Nordic countries because they have access to a lot of renewable
Mhm.
energy, which is another
And
separate
water. Yep.
issue, and water. So for these kinds of huge national agendas to be realized, what's really happening is there is a transferal of the cost of that development to local enclaves that then have to bear the burden of meeting that demand. And of course, the demand is not only coming from governments, they're just a huge institutional bureaucratic actor. Of course, most of the demand is coming from corporations, from like new tech developments like the AI craze that we're
Yeah.
currently in. But in this piece, I really did want to focus on the policymakers. The policymakers that are setting these agendas, and then the local policymakers that then have to process and deal with these localized trade-offs to be able to meet all of this demand.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I love about this piece, it's very helpful for my life because I've been, you use the concept of socio-technical imaginaries in it, and which can do some work and it's fine. But what I've been complaining about for years now with it is that people were like doing exegeses of these visions, planning documents and stuff. And then there was a kind of a lack of materialist analysis of like, people can fantasize and dream up whatever the fuck they want, frankly. You know what I mean? And like the question is, how does it come down and actually connect to the world and produce change or not? And often often there's a not, right? Or there's a lot of tension there at least. And so there's that kind of friction piece I feel like wasn't being attended to in a lot of versions I saw. And so your piece is just really helpful for me because I was complaining about that for years. But now I have been pointing to your essay and just saying like, go, Bridges takes care of it. Go look at that piece. That's the way. If you want to go down this road, that's the way to do it. So thank you very much for writing it in that way.
That is so kind of you, Lee. And I mean, I'm grateful that it's useful to you. But I feel like that's just a massive compliment coming from you. Yeah, I also shared this frustration of, analyses of socio-technical imaginaries are really useful, and it is often about how they fail to materialize. But in this piece, I really wanted to show how, okay, what does it look like when they do materialize, or a version of them do? Because it's not, the whatever is laid out in these documents is not exactly how the future unfolds. But the digitization aspect of it and the intense demand on digital computing is something that is currently ongoing. It's central to various different wars that are going on right now. Yeah, it's digitization and this industrial computing model is central to so much of current government operations.
Yeah.
And I then wanted to go a little bit further past like the generalized discussions that are happening in a subfield that is starting to be called critical data center
Yeah. I mean,
studies.
there's a lot of people looking at these in one way or another, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and there's so much excellent work going on, from all of these different scholars that are really trying to unpack all of these impacts.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes the conversation you know, at the general public level and, in media discourse, and I've certainly contributed to myself, can often get stuck um, at metrics that are global metrics. Like we are using like we're going to use 1,000 terawatt hours to power data centers in 2030,
Okay.
or
Yep.
we're using X million gallons of water every day on data centers. And the truth is, because development doesn't happen equally or uniformly
Right.
everywhere, it happens in these localized hotspots, then there are going to be tensions that erupt in these areas. And there are. And we see that.
Yeah.
We see protests happening. We see capacity issues. We see blackouts. So we need to pay attention to those areas because they're the ones that are wearing the cost of this.
Yeah.
And I think by revealing those stories and paying attention to those stories, we can better actually assess what these trade-offs are. And this piece, kind of developed out of reading several news reports about capacity concerns around the world. One case study that didn't actually make it in there due to word count and other reasons was another case study in Norway, where a local arms or an arms manufacturer was unable to expand because the power capacity had already been allocated to a TikTok data center. So then you start to see headlines like your cat videos are preventing the manufacture of arms for Ukraine. Like, and they're very,
Yeah, yeah,
they're very
yeah.
provocative.
Right, right.
And, you start to go, okay, so what's actually going on in these spaces? But the two case studies that I do look at in the piece are in London and in Northern Virginia. And I think the London one is incredibly salient, and it's a good way to explain to people. I often refer to it to explain to people what I mean by local trade-offs due to energy capacity issues, and energy being used by data centers. So in West London, there's been a huge growth in data center development and new data center connections. And there's lots of reasons why that's happening. It's also pretty close to one of the undersea cables and, close to the centers of commerce and all kinds of reasons. And West London, as a result, then had a moratorium on new connections, specifically for high density housing that might take up a lot of energy. Because the data centers had already secured the allocation for all the power up until 2030. So the way that the London government tried to deal with this capacity problem is just, okay, let's put a pause on all new high density housing, because data centers have already got it. So you can do smaller projects, that's fine. But the problem is that London has been in a perpetual housing crisis for several years. And in West London, there is a high need for high density housing. There's already high housing burden. There are certain areas that have higher poverty rates.
Yeah,
And so this is an incredibly inequitable outcome. It just exacerbates social and economic inequality.
yeah.
And, for what? For the benefit of largely corporations and also governments to have access to this computing.
That is sad, but also, I mean, it's a very nice example of what you're looking at. I had a couple thoughts. I mean, first of all, one thing I just wanted to draw attention to: David Edgerton is writing a history of global production. That's like going to cover the last 200 years. I mean, it's going to be kind of a survey of sorts. But one of the things Dave is very critical of lots of terms, but he doesn't use industrial revolution or industrialization and these kind of terms. And one of the reasons I believe this, I'm being accurate here, one of the reasons he doesn't use industrialization is because often it's used to refer to culture, like their culture in general, when in fact industrial development has always been highly local, and it's always just been a relatively confined part of nations, right? I mean, you can think about the upper Midwest in the United States, and to a lesser degree, the Eastern Seaboard, and it's spread south because of union stuff, blah, blah, blah. But even in China and in other places in Europe, they're all highly centralized places of industrial, production. So I think that what you're finding with these data centers, and I love how you like think of them in these industrial terms, is just like fits this broader model of like, no matter what kind of big developments we can think of, like computerization, it's always actually a fairly local thing. And so it's like, think through that side. Yeah?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I often get asked, "How is this different to previous, forms of development?" And the answer is, it's
Yeah,
not.
it's not. Exactly. Yeah, there even this so what
It's
you're
capitalism.
yeah, I mean,
It's
exactly.
still capitalism.
Right. And this is even, I mean, I think to your point about hotspots, I mean, this is like economic geography goes back to like Marshall or something like that, right? I mean, this has been something economists and economic historians have been thinking and writing about for over a century at this point, is why you get these hotspots. I mean, this is very classical. I mean, that's why Detroit's Detroit in the United States, right? It's because you had industry does this. They centralize in certain places. So even that, yeah, it all
And
fits.
I do think that previous iterations, like, might have been easier for people to grasp onto, like coal,
Right.
like, hey, they take huge infrastructures, it's very dirty, the air is dirty. Like, it has such a visceral material footprint that I think that there is a challenge sometimes to connect the fact that, everything that we do online, and beyond everything that we do online, these industrial models or industrial production today is reliant on industrial computing to an immense scale. I think it's sometimes a trap to fall into um, concerns about individual usage of the
Sure,
internet,
sure.
and I think sometimes that serves certain interests. Um, but yeah, absolutely. I think this maps onto the various different economic transformations that have happened many, many times over and
Yes.
over and over.
Yeah.
It's just that the particular imaginary that's connected to this one has been so powerful and so well done that that metaphor of the cloud, which I actually have started calling a euphemism, because it's like metaphor isn't
Yeah, it's not
doesn't
enough. Yeah.
explain. Yeah, it's not enough. It
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
explain what it is. No, it's a
Yeah.
way to diminish something.
Yeah,
It's a way to
yeah.
obscure and obfuscate
Yeah.
the actual industrial nature of this industrial computing, which is why I keep using that term. But I should read David
It's not
Edgerton's
out
piece
yet.
about
This
this,
is
because
his current project. I mean, it
maybe I'll rethink that
yeah,
term.
no. I mean, I think that no, I don't think the industrial term you're using is a problem at all. He's more, it's more about industrialization as a general concept that gets thrown around, right? Like the industrialization
Right,
of the home and the, whatever. And it's like, well, actually not in a lot of ways. The other thing I
right.
was thinking about is just to connect our discussion to something listeners may have heard about. Like, is the blockchain mining? I mean, is that just like a part of this? So, like, we have there's a lot of stories about all the noise produced by these mining centers, and because they're doing so much computing, they're creating so much heat. They have to have all these fans that are apparently sound like jet engines, and there's so much noise it's ruining people's sleep, and they're just like their health is falling apart, yada yada. I mean, is that a part of your picture here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, cryptocurrency mining, they often are also the projections of energy usage are often not considered in this like global imaginary of what data centers are doing, but they are absolutely a part of the picture. And now, with a lot of the decline and like the peaks and declines of various different cryptocurrencies, we're seeing these ASICs, like the computing infrastructure used for crypto, being reimagined and used now for AI. So that infrastructure that has been servicing cryptocurrency is still servicing cryptocurrency, but it's now pivoting to AI. So whatever it's being used for, application specific, reasons that this computing infrastructure exists, it doesn't really matter. It's there, it
Yeah.
exists, and it will continue to service
Whatever the next
some kind of
bubble
need.
is, it'll be there for it,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, and they are. They're really loud, but also so are data centers. Data centers are incredibly loud. If you've ever walked through one, it's just like like a big burring mess, and neighbors are often complaining about the noise because and it has like physical impacts on people's health. It's not just annoying. It
No,
has
noise is very
impacts on
bad for
their
you.
yeah, it's impacts on their
Yep.
organs and, yeah, all
Heart
kinds of
disease, all kinds of
stuff.
stuff. Yeah.
All kinds of stuff. And that's also what's tricky about this conversation around localized impacts. So in this piece, I was looking at energy and energy trade-offs. So what happens when we have these capacity issues and like what are the costs of that? But there's so many other impacts that are going on in these local communities. And the tricky part is that this is just one part of a whole supply chain of infrastructures that makes this possible. So
Yeah.
the energy that's being consumed at the site of a data center is being extracted somewhere else at some other far community, and the energy is being produced somewhere else at some other community. So, there's been reports recently about coal-fired power plants in Virginia having
Yeah, not being retired in the
being
way that
delayed, not
yeah,
being
yeah.
retired, because there is this there's been this ongoing and growth in demand for energy usage in a way that they didn't anticipate, and so they're now keeping these coal-fired power plants online. Like it's sometimes really hard to make a connection to the various different activities, various different industrial activities. But I think this is a case where data centers themselves are continuing to drive demand for coal power. And so
Yeah. Well,
that,
clearly, I mean, we know that's true in a sense, right? I mean,
yeah.
at least it's not. At least it's like, given the way our system is functioning, things are not retiring, so they're leading to more coal being burned. And God knows how China's dealing with it. I mean, a lot of their energy usage is off the books, even though they're moving very quickly on renewables in a lot of ways. So, yeah, I
hmm
mean, like at the very least, it's not allowing us to wind things down, right?
Yeah. As a little side tidbit, I just finished a chapter. I'm still working on it, for an edited collection on undersea data centers. And this was an idea that's been around for a while, but Microsoft, they did a project called Project Natick or Natick, I don't know how
Okay.
to pronounce it, um, that started in 2014 or 2015. And the second phase of it, the first phase was in California, the second phase was in the Orkney Islands in Scotland. And following that, the success of that project, China has also now been modeling undersea data centers. So they've kind of scaled up very quickly. So
And
they've
is
got
that the
these,
idea that they can just use the water to cool it much more effectively if it's under a bunch of water?
yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, cooling happens, by coils.
Yeah.
So yeah, they use the ambient temperature of the water to reduce the cooling costs, because cooling costs, and energy for cooling is one of the highest demands in a data center. So this is one way to reduce their costs and also their environmental footprint. But there's some
Yeah.
foreseeable problems.
I'm not so sure about that last one. Well, it's interesting, right? I mean, I think our oceans are heating up too much anyway. So, like, using them as heat sinks, it doesn't sound
Yeah.
super good. I don't.
No, no, no. And then, like, the reports you'll read about it, they're like, well, it only increases the temperature like in a really minor way, very close to the data center. And you're like, what? Like, this isn't. But
Yeah.
we're going to industrialize this. We're going to do
Right. We're
this
gonna
on a
scale it.
scale.
Yeah.
Like, maybe it's okay for one or two, but yeah,
Shit, man.
it's a little bit concerning. So, but yeah, you're right. China is also a massive data center market.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of information on that as researchers,
Yeah.
um, but they've got some interesting. They're trialing some interesting ideas.
So, I mean, I think like one way, I mean, I think we're bumping into this in so many research areas where the thing is so damn big and complicated that one person's not going to be able to do this, right? I mean, you really have to work together, which you're doing with this other thing, this Geographies of Digital Wasting, which is on exhibit here at Virginia Tech, or was until very recently. And so tell us a bit about that project and what it's all about and who's involved, and it's cool. Go for it.
Yeah, yeah, cool. So you're right. This project, I mean, this problem is so multifaceted that it needs many people to work on it. If you're interested, get in touch with these folks. And it needs many different methodological approaches. And I think it's really well geared towards collaboration. So for the project on Geographies of Digital Wasting, the exhibit that was at Virginia Tech recently, and is still currently in an online form. You can check out I think it's geographiesofdigitalwasting.com, where you can see most of those materials. So that came out of questions around, okay, so where does this process start and end, and how is it related to these other geographies that I was just talking about? Like the data center is one thing; it's a building in many respects, and it's kind of a boring building in so many ways. But what happens around that on every other side of it in that whole tech supply chain, is part of a much more complex story. And so I had been in conversation with other scholars that were doing work on extraction, so extraction of rare earth minerals that are then used to manufacture hardware that then goes into servers and chips, that then go into servers and go into data centers. And then what happens when those servers die? They and then enter into this a secondary stream of discard that get broken down into their various elemental pieces. Some of it goes to landfill, some of it goes to other markets and gets resmelted and reused in different ways. And a lot of it gets packed up and shipped and offshored to the global south to be thrown into landfill for scavengers to go and then pick over, various precious metals. So we wanted to come together to tell this story of how these geographies, what we consider digital geographies, part of the same digital supply chain, how are they related to one another? How do they impact one another? How can we see these communities that are struggling with the challenges from these, the various different steps in the supply chain as actually part of the same story? How do we build solidarity across these different geographies, across these different communities? And in many ways, the exhibit and the online website is really just scratching the surface. This work is ongoing, both with my collaborators and, just as a political project in general. And so the exhibit, what it does is it outlines this story of 4 steps of the tech supply chain. We've really simplified it down in some ways, but we also do push against the idea of a supply chain having a start and an end. So it's designed in a way that you can interact with any one section at any point in time. So the 4 stages that we go through are extraction of rare earth minerals. That's happening in the Arctic. That project is led by Zane Cooper. And then manufacturing of silicon chips or semiconductors. That project is led by Ingrid Burrington and Ann Chen, and they look at all of the various different wastes associated with this process. And we're thinking expansively about waste here. So, for example, Zane's project in the Arctic, he's also looking at a mine that never came to be. But this one community then was left waiting for so many years. So in many ways, and nothing else could happen at that site because it's all tied up in these local political battles. And so time ends up being, a wasted thing that happens in that community. Whereas, with semiconductor manufacturing, there's lots of material waste, largely a lot of water waste from toxic metals that are used throughout the process. That then impacts local communities. Then my section of the supply chain is looking at what I call the operational section, which is the industrial computing that's happening in data centers. And then our colleagues in Zimbabwe are looking at the discard part of this supply
Got it.
chain. So they're looking at all of the local environmental and health impacts of actually processing e-waste, which is still largely offshored to the global south.
That's very cool. That's very cool. So, and then so you all put together this exhibit, and it's also a team written book. Is that what I gathered from things?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an ongoing project.
Yeah.
So
Cool.
the book is still very much early stages and an idea more than a material thing at this point. But we're currently working on outlining a book based on the same project, based on the exhibit, and the materials that you find on the website.
Very cool. I want to double back to the Amazon Ring stuff. So, I think when I read it, I was thinking it was kind of off on its own. But then early when you were talking through it, I was like, oh, right, this is actually very related to your whole story and connected to it. But I want to draw out some other aspects of it that we haven't talked through yet. So, I mean, first of all, I will confess I have one of these things. We mostly use it as a trail cam. It's
That's
by
cool.
we put it by we have a toad house that is this wonderful piece of statuary that has this giant toad on top of it. but a toad moved into it recently. So my wife and kids use the Ring to watch the toad and check in on it. Um, so, I don't know. My house is full of surveillance technology, it turns out. So it's like I'm a part of the problem. But I wanted to draw out like your notion here of apologies. No, let me see. I switched screens and screwed myself up
That's
here.
okay. I'm gonna just
Yeah,
jump in
jump
and
in,
say
go.
you're not part of the problem, Lee. The problem is the military police industrial complex that we live within.
Yeah.
You're not the problem. And I also I often want to reassure people I have no judgment, and I don't think that we should get caught in a cycle of being like, oh, maybe I shouldn't use this technology. It's more that what is it connecting to and what is it facilitating?
Yeah.
And with the yeah, I'm gonna let you get
No,
back to
no,
your
no, no.
question,
You're
but
actually setting up my questions perfectly. Because what I was going to
okay.
ask you about is, first of all, it's kind of related stuff, but it's like, first of all, your concept of infrastructural obfuscation, and
Mhm.
second of all, playing out this kind of carcerality, the piece of the story, right? That although it's a private infrastructure, it's more and more being drawn into, what we think of as more like public stuff, like policing and such. So yeah,
Mhm.
you were going there.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me unpack the first term that I introduced in that piece, the infrastructural obfuscation. So, uh, what's happening with the Ring cameras in particular, and why I find that project interesting, is that they have partnerships with law enforcement. So they have partnerships with the police where they can ask for consent to access your camera's feed. And that's something that you provide as a camera owner. And so in this way, there's this huge surveillance infrastructure that's kind of being camouflaged as home surveillance products, you know, like, you know, for like a trail cam or whatever it is. And the good thing is that you as the camera owner do have agency over whether or not you provide consent.
Yeah.
That is, unless a crime happens and they
Right.
get a warrant and they go through all the legal routes, which was already the case previously with
Yeah, they could do that with
CCTV.
your
Like,
surveillance system anyway back in the day, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but the difference with with these partnerships and with this internet connected home surveillance cameras is that consent lies with the camera owner, and they provide consent based on everyone else in the household or and their neighbors too. And by the nature of doorbells, they're often facing outwards towards the public street or towards your neighbor's house. And all of the people that get captured on that camera don't provide consent. It's just the person that owns the camera. And the other thing that's happening is they're running various different programs where they might try to connect those cameras, the live feeds of those cameras, to real time crime centers, where they consolidate cameras from public space, because there are cameras. We live
Sure,
in a
yeah.
surveillance society, so
Yeah.
everywhere that we go in lots of private and public space will already be surveilled. And so in those cases where um, Ring camera owners are providing consent for access to their live feeds, that raises a whole host of questions, particularly around the communities that are already over surveilled. And then when you add uh, analytics on top of that, when you add facial recognition technology, or machine learning analytics that are designed to pick up patterns which we know are fallible. These systems are racialized, and they are flawed, and they tend to have a higher error rate for people of color. They tend to identify people with disabilities as acting out of the norm.
Huh.
And
Yeah.
so they have all these various different social impacts and concerns that haven't been addressed and are ongoing. So when you add this kind of home surveillance that's happening in neighborhoods that the police couldn't just come in and install these cameras because these spaces are protected by the Fourth Amendment. They're protected by, like, the government can't do that without a warrant, without like
Yeah.
going through due process. But this kind of new configuration provides this backdoor entry. Once you provide consent, then it's fine. Except it raises a lot of questions about the erosion of privacy, particularly in the household, like particularly in like the most, private and previously, protected space. So that's the concern. It's not about the trail.
Yeah.
Keep your camera, keep it connected to the internet. It's lots of fun. I watch the videos.
Yeah. Well, we got a proper trail cam now, so God knows what's gonna happen. Um. Uh. So yeah, where are you? I mean, I think I want to kind of wrap up by asking where you're headed. Is the land use stuff, is that headed into a book too? I mean, you just landed. You just got to your first job, right? I mean, you were
Yeah.
out of your first academic position. So
Yeah.
you graduated from Annenberg School, and then you spent a year at Harvard, right? At Berkman
Yep.
Klein.
Yep.
And then you landed here. So you're fresh, right? You have some time. But is it the land you're gonna bring the land use stuff together into a book? Is that the idea?
That's the idea. I
Yeah.
mean, it is based on the dissertation
Yeah.
field work in both Virginia and Southern California. Some of that field work is still ongoing because it's always hard to like define the
Yeah.
ends of these projects.
Well, Northern
And
Virginia is
from
so accessible to you now too, huh?
Yes, I know, huge benefit.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, I spoke a lot about like these local tensions and what are the local conditions that allow for the expansion. I in the process of doing that work, I then became really attuned to land use changes. So what was happening in
Oh, nice.
approving these new developments is that often agricultural or previously open farmlands, agricultural environmental resource, these are land use codes that were previously used to identify those blocks of land. They're codes that are designated by local planning divisions that also outline a vision for how they want that community to develop over time. And in the process, because there was such a boom in data center development, they were finding there was less room in industrialized areas, but also these companies prefer greenfield sites, which are undeveloped sites. They don't like to spend money to go into previously industrialized sites and reimagine them for their use because it costs them more money.
Yeah.
And so
Sure.
instead of going to an old mall and reimagining it as a data center, they want to go to the dairy farmer and they want to pay
Fascinating.
them $1 million an acre to pave over their dairy farm and put a data center there. And so that's what's happening. And so through my ethnographic work, I really became attuned to these land use battles. And it's something that is central to that book, to my dissertation work, and is going to be central to
Yeah.
the book. I see land use as a pivotal policy issue
Yes.
that is allowing the continued expansion of the digital infrastructures that uphold, our
Yeah.
digital economy.
That's cool, man. I
So
love
yeah,
land use stuff. I mean, and it goes back. I have a friend he's a historian of Europe, and he's really nerdy about like the history of land use and all these kinds
I
of
need to
things.
I need to read him and meet him.
You guys would get on very well. Yes. That's cool. So, I mean, are they going so far as using eminent domain sometimes, or have they not gone that route so much?
So eminent domain comes up in the transmission issues. So with all of these new connections, they have to have new electricity lines, new transmission
Uh-huh.
lines laid.
Okay. Sure.
And this is happening, like, especially in rural areas
Yeah.
where this is happening. That means that they have to like cut through people's
Got
properties.
it.
And that's when
Sure.
you also get some pretty serious, fights with local
Yeah.
communities. But the eminent domain is not being used for data centers because these are commercial operations at this point in time. But we might see that in the future.
So I'm about to ask you a super sick question that you shouldn't be thinking about already, but have you like, do you know where you want to go after this thing? Like you have,
Ah,
yeah. Do you have like, are you are you like a 5 or 10 year forward person? Or are you like more, sometimes I can be like that in an imaginary way, but I'm more like a tumble through existence kind of person on most days. So where are you at?
you know, I think I want to be that like 5, 10 year person, but I think I'm more of the latter, the tumble
Yeah.
through life kind of. But the thing is, like, as I delve deeper into all of these topics, as I've been doing this work now for like close to 5 years,
Yeah.
some folks have been doing this work, like Mel Hogan has been in this field, has really championed this
Yeah. I
field
went
for
on her
the last
podcast.
10
She's cool.
years.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I think it starts to become a bit of an obsession. Like, there's so much
Yeah.
there
Right.
that we haven't even discussed or, like,
Right.
got into. So honestly, I think the next project probably will come out of this one. One thing that I'm starting to think about a lot now, and I've been in conversations with other scholars that are doing work in this area, is these private wires. So the data center companies having all of these energy capacity issues and now, building their own energy projects. They're building renewable
Wow.
projects. They're also they often tout themselves as being the largest investors in renewable energy.
Well, that's
And
very convenient.
yeah, and this is but the thing is they might invest in renewable projects so they can secure the purchase power agreements, so that they can secure the power, so that they can balance their carbon checkbooks, and so they can look more sustainable at the end of the day. But also their demand is increasing at a much faster rate than any of their renewable projects. But the questions around them building their own renewable private infrastructure is gonna create a lot of, I think it's if we're talking about environmental justice and the energy transition that we're all facing, that's coming, and that is we're a part of now, um, they're already securing all the assets there. They're building their own utilities. They're building their own private utilities, and that's gonna create a lot of tension in the future. It's also gonna lead to inequitable outcomes and inequitable access to these renewable sources.
Yeah.
So,
When we need
I
to be
have a
using
feeling.
renewables to reduce the stuff we're already
Exactly.
doing, not for this new stuff we're building out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um so I think I asked you that question because it just kind of has to do with your vision. And what I hear you saying is like there's so much on this topic actually. You could go for there's a lot to dig into. Have you met my friend Ben Coders O'Brien? Yeah, he's a
No.
Columbia University grad student. He's doing history. It's kind of fascinating. He's in the comms department. I can just introduce you to via email. But he's doing this survey history of energy transitions in the United States from the 19th century to the present. And it's all about aggregation, or agglomeration, or like we just build energy systems on top of each other. They don't really go away so much. Um, but building on some other people's works, but also a lot of his own thinking, he's really looking at industrial users as the drivers of energy history, basically. And so I
Yeah.
think you guys would have fun chats because it's all like he's doing the through line and he's paying attention to the data centers thing because he just sees it as like a perfect, like culmination of the story, which, involved like printing presses and stuff in the late 19th century. There was other systems going through this process, but now we're here.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. I want to read that history.
Yeah, his
And
dissertation will be
also
done in like a year, I
oh,
think. So yeah, we'll have it.
great.
Yeah.
Great. That would be so useful. Also, because we need that history to then even think about what direction we're going now. Like, for us to even imagine, okay, so, like, what does it look like? What is the path that we're on? What does that look like? And then how do we pause for a second and go, okay, like, what do we want it to look like? Do we want to stay on this path? And then if we want it to look differently, what do we need to do to get on the past that we want it to look like.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Well,
those
it's wild.
histories will be
Yeah.
really important.
Well, Lauren, I knew this was going to be fun. Man, it's good seeing you. Thank you so much for coming on today. This has been great.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Lee. I had a great time.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of our podcast. You can reach us with questions, comments, and suggestions at leevinsel@gmail.com or by following me on Twitter at STS_news or on YouTube at People's Things. Our podcast is distributed by the New Books Network, the leading platform for academic podcasts, so that you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Peoples and Things, like most things in this world, depends on the work of many people. I want to thank my brother Jake Vinsel for writing the music for the show. I want to thank my buddy Juliana Castro for designing the logos for the podcast. You can check out her work at julianacastro.co. Joe Fort is the producer for the podcast, and Mandy Lamb is the production assistant. This podcast and other Peoples and Things programming are produced in affiliation with Virginia Tech Publishing and supported by the Center for Humanities and the University Libraries at Virginia Tech. For information about other podcasts from Virginia Tech Publishing, visit publishing.vt.edu. For the entire Peoples and Things team, I am Lee Vinsel. And most importantly, I want to thank you for listening. Thanks.